Shalom, brother. CJay, please get us started.
Alrighty, and so I'm going to go ahead and just jump into a quick prayer again real quick. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to make these videos again, Lord Jesus. I want to pray that me and Brother Nicholas here may decrease, Lord Jesus, so that you may increase, and that these videos are used for nothing more than glorification of your word and your kingdom, Lord Jesus. And I ask these things in Jesus Christ's holy name, and we give you the glory. Amen. All right, so we left off. So to give a small recap of where we've been so far, on the first episode, we discussed in depth Revelation 17 and why I think it is very clear that Revelation 17 refers to the Vatican when it refers to the Great Whore, right? And we saw numerous things that indicated that. For example, number one, we saw mother of harlots, like being the mother of different denominations. We saw that the whore sits upon seven hills, right? We saw that the woman was herself the great city, which, of course, in John's time was absolutely Rome, and so on and so forth, right? And so we saw some pretty solid evidences there to indicate that this could potentially be the Vatican. We then looked at Daniel chapter 2, specifically at the iron in the statue, and linked that to the Romans, and deduced from Daniel chapter 2 that this fourth kingdom should not be ending in the traditional fashion, but splitting and evolving into something else, namely those feet of clay and iron. And then saw that that is indeed what one could say the Catholic Church did, in the form of splitting the Roman Empire and then evolving into the Western and Eastern rites of Christianity. What we left off on, yes.
Well, I'd like to mention that we have graphics and text on screen, and the sources that we go to support these. And then from there, there's a lot of cross-scriptural reference, of course, and spiritual insight, and our standard Christian stuff as we follow Christ in the Spirit.
Right.
So, yeah, you can check out those previous 2 episodes. They're very good. I'm very excited about this series. Brother CJay has a lot of insight to share with us. So let us continue.
And the thing we left off on yesterday was we were looking through, after having established this scriptural foundation, we were looking through what's known as the fundamental agreement, between the Holy See and the State of Israel, which was signed in December of 1993, December 30th to be exact, and was actually the first real attempt at reconciliation between the Vatican, which is a nation, and the State of Israel, which is, of course, the nation place for the Jews. And we left off on Article 10, when we had gone through these first articles 1 through 9. We had pointed out how there was a lot of precedent set up here that, though not necessarily problematic at the time, we were saying, hold on to it because it had since been used to create greater things. But when we came to Article 10, we pointed out that what we see here is actually some very particular phraseology that creates, shall we say, apocalyptic consequences for the future. To reiterate, let's read. The Holy State and the State of Israel jointly reaffirm the right of the Catholic Church to property, without prejudice to rights relied upon by the parties. And then here's where we get the really important part. The Holy See and the State of Israel will negotiate, not can or potentially will, but will definitively negotiate in good faith a comprehensive agreement containing solutions acceptable to both parties on unclear, unsettled, and disputed issues concerning property, economic and fiscal matters relating to the Catholic Church generally, or to specific Catholic communities or institutions. Now, this is a very, very important section of this article, because not only does this guarantee the Catholic Church certain custodianship and indeed just outright ownership of certain properties in the old city of Jerusalem, right? Areas which are traditionally considered to be holy, right? But if you just take this at face value, and many have, and we'll be showing you the documentation for that in this episode, actually, what this is declaring is that the Catholic Church and Israel will be discussing, without defining what these properties that are disputed are, right? Unclear, unsettled, or disputed issues concerning property, right? Without specifying, they're saying that the Catholic Church and Israel is going to be discussing those things. Well, what is the single most unclear, unsettled, and disputed issue concerning property in the state of Israel? It's obviously the Temple Mount, right? And you could argue that potentially that was not the intention of the people writing this document. I don't think it matters, because in the future we have seen what we've seen. And again, we'll be showing you that in this video. But I kind of doubt, honestly, that they were not actually intending on this somehow relating to the Temple Mount, because that is the main, the main issue as far as unsettled territories, or properties rather, in the city of Jerusalem. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre has really never been in serious dispute. The Israelis don't care about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, right? And the Muslims don't really care about it.
And then one moment, the question is there anything in here specifically accounting for the Temple Mount, or is it only accounted for in this vague language? Because it's obvious that it needs to be accounted for, and so we can't just pretend when this is the only thing that accounts for it. We can't pretend that maybe it's not meant to apply or something. That would be absurd.
Right. And so what we need to kind of look at with this article itself, we have to remember that when we're reading this article, and not just this article, but this entire document, we're in 1993, right? So when we're reading the things that are in this article, we have to understand this is the foundation from which more things we're going to talk about in the future is built on. So are you going to find an outright reference to the Temple Mount in this document? No. But what you will find is the foundations that will allow for future references to the Temple Mount that we'll be able to show you.
Okay, so we're going to be going deeper into this stuff and doing due diligence and just continuing as long as we like, because we enjoy doing this every day anyway. So there's nothing stopping us.
Right.
And so if someone's trying to say it's conjecture or something, then it's more fair to let us take the time to show our fleshed out perspective. And and we're even talking about, after we get really far in this series, making a condensed version. And then if people are, instead of making a documentary that then you'd have to have a hard time researching if the specific points are true or if they're just pulling the wool over your eyes, In our case, we'd have this series there to back it up. So if people want to say we're pulling the wool over their eyes, they can go to a certain episode of the series. And, so we're doing our best, being that we're just two men, right?
Amen. And people do need to definitely realize that there is certain things to be said here about, we are indeed fallible brothers. I think that there is, not to discredit our work here, but, if there are, issues that somebody does find where we do need to make a small correction to make sure that the entire line of information here, the entire pattern of evidence, as the Tim Mahoney would say, right, is actually accurate, we're fine with that, right? Because we're fallible men. But the documents do still exist, and there is still very bona fide evidence of the general theme we have here, even if small details may need correction here and there.
Okay, so
now
that
the
said,
thing about
I'm just saying, with that said, let's just continue doing our best here.
Indeed. Now the other portions here in Article 10, we're going to end up reading an article from Eretz Shiva, which is the Times of Israel. It's the largest, at least it was at the time, which was 1995, radio station for news in the state of Israel. And they're going to provide for us some context as to why this point is important. But if you look down there at Article 10.c, right, what you find, or 10.2c, so Article 10.2, Section C. The parties intend to commence the aforementioned negotiation within 3 months of entry into force of the present agreement and aim to reach agreement within 2 years from the beginning of the negotiations. Now, it is important to note that the word aim is different from the word will. Right? When they say we will discuss this, that means it absolutely will happen. When they say we aim to do it within 2 years, That means that that's a goal, but not necessarily something that will happen. However,
Okay. And we're going to have to go over B. Should we just go over it in order? I feel we have to go over B real quick.
yeah, absolutely. So for the purpose of the said negotiations, the Permanent Bilateral Working Commission will appoint one or more bilateral subcommissions of experts to study the issue and make proposals.
Okay, so we have certain action here that that's sort of the main point I want to get at. So I don't know if this is going to lead into our future stuff or something. So go ahead, brother.
No, absolutely. And that is an important thing to notice for sure, because one of the things that you see with that is with the appointing. So just to read that one more time, right? Appoint one or more bilateral subcommissions of experts to study the issues and make proposals. Well, which issues? Well, this is in the context of us having already read Section A, right? Which says that they will have these full comprehensive agreements on matters relating to property and so on, right? So what it's saying here is they're going to have bilateral, meaning Catholic and Israeli, right? Subcommissions of experts, however they determine what is an expert in this field. I imagine it's probably going to be historical experts and religious experts like rabbis and priests. But to a certain extent, we don't really know exactly their expertise as far as the bodies themselves, because they're somewhat secretive, right? We don't know exactly who this bilateral commission is, in other words. But what you see there is they're going to be establishing this bilateral subcommission of experts to study the issues of property in the Holy Land and then make proposals as to how the Catholic Church and Israel could better, cooperate in regards to those holy sites. And when you go down to that point C, Arut Shiva will make the argument, we'll see today, that actually did happen. There's an argument to be made that AIM is something that, it was a goal and did not necessarily come to pass. And so maybe they had to push it off. And that's why we come all the way here to the 2020s without necessarily having these negotiations finished. There are numerous reports out there which are somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily official. They're leaked documents kind of thing, right? So because of that, I don't want to put too much faith in them. However, I will still show you the articles from Arut Shiva that, declares that Shimon Peres, the president of Israel at the time, actually had secret agreements with the Vatican within that 2-year timetable that was given. And we will obviously be able to get to that probably in this episode itself, because we're almost finished here with this document. As far as the things which are important to us. So next we see in point D, not necessarily too important here. During the period of these negotiations, actions incompatible with these commitments shall be avoided. That's obviously something that just tends to happen, right? So really nothing to look into on that particular part. Article 11.1, the Holy See and the State of Israel declare their respective commitment to the promotion of the peaceful resolution of conflicts among states and nations, excluding violence and terror from international life. So we see here a commitment between the two to some form of a general peace, right? As they put it, promotion of the peaceful resolution of conflicts among states and nations. To a certain extent, this is just rhetoric, no harm, no foul, but you also need to understand that the global peacenik movement, for all of its positive qualities, does in the end seek to bring some form of a forced global unity in the form of groups like the United Nations and groups like the European Union and so on, right? You can ask Britain right now just how difficult it is once you've willingly joined these globalists to willingly leave these globalists, right? And the European Union isn't even that powerful. But just always note that when you hear this kind of peaceful rhetoric, because we all agree with peace, of course. We want to be peacemakers, right? But there is a false peace and a true peace. And I think very often you see when you have this sort of a global kumbaya trying to be established by people, it's very often a false peace. Point number 2, the Holy See, while maintaining in every case the right to exercise its moral and spiritual teaching office, deems it opportune to recall that, owing its own character, It is solemnly committed to remaining a stranger to all merely temporal conflicts, with which principle applies specifically to disputed territories and unsettled borders. Let me say that one more time, because I kind of messed that up. The Holy See, while maintaining in every case the right to exercise its moral and spiritual teaching office, deems it opportune to recall that, owing to its own character, it is solemnly committed to remaining a stranger to all merely temporal conflicts, which principle applies specifically to disputed territories and unsettled borders. Now, there is an argument to be made that this article turned out to be a lie, because the Vatican has outright declared support for Palestine in the Pope Francis era. However, this is not a lie, but just a very cleverly put together article. Let's read it again. While maintaining in every case the right to exercise its moral and spiritual teaching. There's the important part, right? Because one could argue, and the Catholic Church absolutely does, that it is exercising its moral teaching by going against war and things like ethnic cleansing, which it accuses in some instances the Israelis of doing when it comes to the Palestinians. And furthermore, it would argue, and has, that being in its spiritual office, it has a sort of an obligation to the Holy Land and the Old City itself. And so when you see in the modern day things like endorsement of Palestine or Pope Francis coming out against the Trump peace plan or things like that, and you read this and think to yourself, well, they said they were going to be a stranger to all merely temporal conflicts. Well, they don't consider this to be a temporal conflict. And by the way, you don't either. You may not realize that you don't, but the reason that we focus so much on Israel in modern day politics is because virtually no Christians consider it to be a strictly temporal conflict. Virtually no Muslims or Jews consider it to be a strictly temporal conflict. All of us are of the belief, at least mostly, that there is a spiritual nature to the conflicts that happen in the state of Israel, or in the land of Israel, I should say. Article 12 just has 1 point. Holy See and the State of Israel will continue to negotiate in good faith in pursuance of the agenda agreed upon in Jerusalem on July 15th, 1992, and confirmed at the Vatican on July 29th, 1992. Likewise, on issues arising from articles of the present agreement, as well as on the other issues bilaterally agreed upon as objects of negotiation. Now, you absolutely should check in to those events, July 15th, 1992 and July 29th, 1992, simply because it's better to be informed than uninformed. However, for purposes of being somewhat pithy, because this is already going to be multiple hours on end, we will not be going into those in depth simply because the conclusion of those matters is found in the document we're currently reading. Article number 13. In this agreement, the parties use these terms in the following sense: the Catholic Church and the Church, including inter alia, its communities and institutions. Communities of the Catholic Church, meaning the Catholic religious entities considered by the Holy See as churches. I'm not entirely sure how to say this, so please forgive me. Sui iuris, and by the State of Israel as recognized religious communities. So, meaning the Catholic religious entities considered by the Holy See as churches, sui iuris, and by the State of Israel as recognized religious communities. Now, the first thing there is, as we've stated before, as we were saying yesterday, right, this idea of recognized religious communities is a somewhat foreign concept to Americans, at least, because we kind of have a very solid separation of church and state. This is not the case in the State of Israel. The rabbinate is actually quite powerful in politics in Israel. And so as a result, the State of Israel does very often have agreements with certain religious bodies that allow them to actually do the things which they are wanting to do. Much more important than that, though, at least in my own personal opinion, is this meaning the Catholic religious entities considered by the Holy See as churches sui iuris, which means of one's own right. Right? It's the word sui is self. It's the same word you find in suicide, for example. And actually, I believe that other word comes from the word juris. like jurisprudence or a jury, for example. But I'm not 100% sure on that. Nonetheless, the point is that they're
that would
considered...
make a whole lot of sense, because the J was originally an I. That's why Jesus is spelled with a J. So when you call him Jesus, that would be kind of like calling Juan Juan,
Right.
or Jose.
Exactly, and it makes sense with it too, because with the idea being that it is they're churches unto themselves, right, or of their own right. I believe is the direct translation of that phrase, and that ends up becoming very important when you start to look into certain beliefs of the Catholic Church. Like, for example, the Catholic Church believes itself to be the head of all churches. That includes patriarchal churches, that includes Episcopal churches, that includes Anglican churches, so on, so forth, right? These churches can be considered to be churches in their own right. And in fact, if you go to sui iuris on Wikipedia, interestingly enough, one of the things that you end up finding is certain stuff about like the patriarchal churches of Eastern Catholicism and stuff like that, right? Which you don't traditionally think of as Roman Catholic. When we get into certain laws that were passed in China, which we'll be getting into that today, you'll see that the Catholic Church truly considers churches in its own right to be virtually any church, so long as that church will agree to be under the auspices of the Catholic Church, which can very often be forced. And we'll have to flesh that out a lot more going in. The state of Israel and the state, including inter alia, its authorities established by law. And then point number 2, notwithstanding the validity of this agreement is between the parties and without detracting from the generality of any applicable rule of law with reference to treaties, the parties agree that the agreement does not prejudice rights and obligations arising from existing treaties between either party and a state or states, which are known and in fact available to both parties at the time of the signature of this agreement. So basically, this means that this is not actually going to be something which impacts or discredits any existing treaty, regardless of if only one or if both of the parties is involved. This is important because when you have certain things like, for example, the doctrine of the Catholic Church in regards to being the universal body, right? That is what the word Catholic means, actually, the universal church. Or when you have, for example, Pope Francis say that evangelization takes precedent over doctrine, by which he means that somebody can believe damnable doctrine so long as they are under the auspices of the Catholic Church. Those sorts of doctrines or agreements within themselves or agreements without themselves, such as agreements that they have with the Lutheran Church, for example, which we'll get into, those are not going to be impacted by anything said in this document. Those still hold true. And the same holds true for anything that Israel has on that regard. Upon signature of the present fundamental agreement and in preparation for the establishment of full diplomatic relations, the Holy See and the State of Israel exchange special representatives whose rank and privileges are specified in an additional protocol, which is down below. These are essentially overglorified ambassadors, but we'll be able to get a little bit more detail on that in just a second. Following the entry into force and immediately upon the beginning of the implementation of the present fundamental agreement, the Holy See and the State of Israel will establish full diplomatic relations at the level of apostolic. I don't really know how to pronounce this word, but I believe it is nunciature. But a lot of these things I've actually only read before rather than actually hearing them pronounced out loud, so I apologize on that. On the part of the Holy See and the embassy, on the part of the State of Israel. So once again, this is just reiterating that they are going to now be having diplomatic relations with each other as nation states do. I guess in the case of the Vatican nation city, but nonetheless. This agreement shall enter into force on the date of the latter notification of ratification by a party, done in 2 original copies in the English and Hebrew languages, both texts being equally authentic. In case of divergence, the English text shall prevail. Aren't you glad you're an English speaker? Signed in Jerusalem this 13th day of the month of December in the year 1993. Which corresponds to the 16th day of the month of Tevet in the year 5754 on the Jewish calendar. And then we have a little reference to the guys who were signing this here. We have Claudio Celli from the Vatican and Dr. Yossi Belin from the government of the State of Israel. Additional protocol, point number 1. In relation to Article 14 of the Fundamental Agreement, signed by the Holy See and the State of Israel, the special representatives shall have, respectively, the personal rank of apostolic nuncio and ambassador. These special representatives shall enjoy all the rights, privileges, and immunities granted to heads of diplomatic missions under international law and common usage on the basis of reciprocity. So you see, basically, they are, once again, glorified ambassadors. Special representatives of the State of Israel to the Holy See while residing in Italy shall enjoy all the rights, privileges, and immunities defined by Article 12 of the Treaty of 1929 between the Holy See and Italy. That treaty, of course, was signed betwixt Pope Pius and Benito Mussolini. Regarding envoys of foreign governments of the Holy See residing in Italy, the rights, privileges, immunities extended to the personnel of a diplomatic mission shall likewise be granted to the personnel of the Israeli Special Representative's mission. According to an established custom, neither the special representative nor the official members of his mission can at the same time be members of Israel's diplomatic mission to Italy. The special representative of the Holy See to the State of Israel may at the same time exercise their representative functions of the Holy See and be accredited to other states. He and the personnel of his mission shall enjoy all the rights, privileges, and immunities granted to Israel, to diplomatic agents and missions. And then lastly, the names, ranks, and functions of the special representatives will appear in an appropriate way in the official list of foreign missions accredited to each party. And once again, you see this signed by Claudio Celli and Yossi Belin. So, this document provides a lot of potential groundwork for us, right? To build in the future certain things which I think you will find quite interesting. Once again, the main thing we really, really want to focus on is that Article 10, Section 2, or Point 2, Section A, right? Which had declared for us that they were actually going to be discussing matters of disputed property betwixt the Catholic Church and Israel. Just one more time to reiterate that the Holy See and the State of Israel will negotiate in good faith a comprehensive agreement containing solutions acceptable to both parties on unclear, unsettled, and disputed issues concerning property, economic, and fiscal matters relating to the Catholic Church generally, or to specific Catholic communities or institutions. So, a lot of people don't even know that existed, right? Let alone what it actually says, and some of the stuff that actually goes back and forth between Israel and the Catholic Church, rather, in that particular document.
And if I may, I have heard this cited briefly and attention called to this, but it's important that some of us who are calling attention to this go in deeper, and that some of us who are having our attention called, that we hear those who are going in deeper, so that we're a complete body for Christ, as Christ.
Amen. And one of the things that we also need to remember when we're looking at this too is this is a official government document, right? It is official government document for both the Israeli government and the government of the Vatican City. And the reason that is such an important thing to continue to remember is because when people, come out and say things, along the lines of, well, this, that, and the other thing are conspiracy theories or just conjecture or what have you, you need to understand you can certainly, try and argue that we're taking things out of context, but we just read for you that entire document word for word. So it's going to be kind of hard to do that, right? And I think rather than try and fight against things, right, it would behoove us to just see if the evidence actually checks out. Now,
Indeed. Yes, please go on. Perfect.
So I have a article here from 2011 from Arut Shiva.
Okay, do you want to private chat it to me, and we'll do it the same way again?
Yes, sir, but I want to find something particular here really quick because I'm trying to... All right.
Yeah, well, if you already have one link, then I can start getting my stuff set up with it.
All righty, and so let me send this here to you. It'll be coming in the private chat here now.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to send you another one from the same group, and we'll kind of jump back and forth between them because they're discussing some of the same things. And again, by the way, just so you guys know, Arut Shiva would be roughly analogous to something like what's the big NPR, right, in the United States, or BBC in Great Britain, right? It's a very large radio station in news in the state of Israel. So we see this one. The Vatican wants to.
Well, one moment. What should be on the screen now? The second link or what?
Let's put the first link on first. So it says the Vatican wants to lay its hands on Jerusalem.
Okay, I do need just one moment.
Absolutely.
Let me see what that tab looks like so I can find it. It's got a 7, Vatican once. Okay. And there it is.
All right. So we see the Vatican is now reiterating demands, for control of religious sites in Jerusalem. Jordan's occupation, 1948 to 1967, did not bother them. In other words, what they're saying is when Jordan had control of these holy sites, they didn't seem to care. But now that Israel has control of these holy sites, all of a sudden they care. Anyways, peace negotiations in the Middle East must tackle the issue of the status of the holy sites of Jerusalem. A direct quote from Cardinal Jean-Louis Taran, head of the Vatican's Council for Interreligious Dialogue, declared several days ago in Rome. Now, several days ago is in the year 2011, right? This is the 15th of December 2011 that this article was posted.
Okay, so you give me a moment to see if I can put that on screen while you're saying it.
Okay. So
I'm going to zoom in and highlight it. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Gosh, I'm struggling just to highlight it. There it is.
All righty. So you see there, when it gives out those little, things like a couple days ago or in the past weeks, right? Just understand that is back in 2011. So what does Cardinal Jean-Louis Taran say? Peace negotiations in the Middle East must tackle the issues of the status of holy sites in Jerusalem. Now, that's a little bit stronger language than last time, right? Last time it was, we will discuss disputed properties. Now it's, we must discuss the status of holy sites. He's not outright saying the Temple Mount, but we're getting pretty close, right? We're getting a lot farther from 1993 to 2011 in our jump. And we'll go back, obviously, in the timeline as well. But we're trying to illustrate a point for you guys that when I say these things were built upon by later generations, I'm not making that up, right? This is absolutely what the Vatican did end up doing. Whether or not this was the intention of the original Vatican writers is irrelevant to what actually happened. The Vatican's former foreign minister asked to place some Israeli holy places under Vatican authority, alluding to the cenacle on Mount Zion and the Garden of Gethsemane at the foot of the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. The first site also houses what is referred to as King David's tomb. Now, one of the things that we need to specify in this and in any time that we read these articles, because I know that people will instantaneously, they'll grasp to something like this and say, well, hang on, they just specified what exactly they were talking about and the Temple Mount wasn't included in there, right? But you got to understand the Temple Mount is going to be one of the very last things discussed here. So we're not going to get discussions about the Temple Mount until articles which are from 2018, 2019, right? And there's a reason for that. It's because that is a trigger word in a sense for a lot of people, right? There are a lot of Christians, a lot of Jews, a lot of Muslims, a lot of Catholics, and so on, who the second you start talking about the Temple Mount, some alarms start going off, right? And they're like, all right, what's going on here? That's kind of weird. That's apocalyptic. That's culty. I don't like that. You know what I mean? And there's good reason for that, of course, because if you read the scriptures, the only time that we'll truly see a third temple, provided that you believe the New Testament, is when there is an Antichrist showing up. And the only time you'll see a third temple, provided you believe only the Old Testament and the rabbis, is when Messiah shows up. And of course, according to the rabbis, Messiah will be showing up for the first time, which means if and or when their Messiah shows up, he will very likely be our Antichrist. See how that kind of can work out there. I'm not saying definitively that's the case, but I could certainly see such a thing occurring.
Yeah, and that's a discussion that's going on in the church. So Remnant Radio is one place that's addressed that at least once. I'm a bit distracted playing producer here and stuff, but you were talking about Islam, I presume? Their Christ being our Antichrist?
Well, so I was specifically talking about the Jews, actually. But I think I actually theorize it will be kind of both. I think that the Antichrist will end up being, in conjunction with Revelation 17, a Catholic Pope. And I believe that Catholic Pope will claim to be the Jewish Messiah, the Islamic Masih, the 12th Imam, and so on and so forth. Because truly, if you think about it, if you're going to unite all of these different religions, then it would make sense for you to claim all of these different titles that these religions claim, like a second coming, or in the case of the Jews, they would think of it as a first coming. But of course, there'd have to be some sort of a finagling to make that work, to make it so it's a second coming and a first coming at the same time.
Okay, well, this is good. It gives people some concept of where you're coming from as they test us and test our perspectives. So, yeah, there's definitely other perspectives on this in the church too. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is absolutely something we need to always remember too, because that is true, right? We don't necessarily know for sure what is going to be occurring here. We can speculate, and there's a lot of evidence that will tell us where to speculate, but the definitive, calling out names and stuff like that, there's a lot of people out there who will say Pope Francis is the Antichrist. Well, he may be, but I don't think that you could definitively declare such a thing. You know what I mean? But at any rate, quote, there will not be peace if the question of the holy sites is not adequately resolved, end quote, Tarn said. Quote, the part of Jerusalem within the walls, within the holy sites of the three religions, and by the way, within the walls can also be described as the old city. In fact, that is typically how it is described, is humanity's heritage. One more time. The part of Jerusalem within the walls, with the holy sites of the three religions, is humanity's heritage. The sacred and unique character of the area must be safeguarded, and it can only be done with a special, internationally guaranteed statute. Now, if I didn't actually have the source in front of you guys right now, would that not sound like some anti-Catholic crazed Protestant frothing at the mouth, just made that up and put it on my website somewhere? But that is actually a direct quote from Vatican officials, right? In this particular case, Cardinal Jean-Louis Taran, who was the former head, who is the head, at least at the time that this was written. I'm not sure that he is now, but who is the head of the Vatican's Council for Interreligious Dialogue. That is not coincidental, my friends. The Israeli government and the Vatican are deadlocked in discussions over the status of the religious sites. Did you ever hear about this? Probably not. Interesting that this all occurred back in 2011, nearly a decade ago, and we did not hear anything, right? Now, I'm not saying there's a big conspiracy to make sure nobody hears all this kind of information, but what I am saying is quit watching your mainstream news sources, because they're definitely not giving you the important information. The Israeli government and the Vatican deadlocked. I already read that. Vatican officials are now reiterating their demand for control over the religious sites in the ancient and holy city founded by King David as the capital of ancient Israel and now the capital of the reestablished Jewish state. Danny Alyan, Israel's deputy foreign minister, declared that Israel might consider giving the Vatican, quote, a greater role, end quote, in operating the sites. In the last weeks, the Roman Catholic Church authorities increased their political initiatives for Catholic control over some sites in Jerusalem. The Vatican's former Archbishop in Jerusalem, Michael Sabah, just promoted an appeal to the European Union and United Nations to stop the Hebraization of Jerusalem. Once again, if I was not reading that from a legitimate news source in the state of Israel right in front of you for you all to see, would that not sound like something that some crazed cultic anti-Catholic made up? Let's read that one more time. The Vatican's former Archbishop in Jerusalem, Michael Sabah, just prompted an appeal to the European Union and United States to stop the Hebraization of Jerusalem. Once again, direct quotes from Vatican officials, right? I mean, this kind of stuff, they're trying to rob the Jewish people of their sovereignty for the sake of their own agenda being laid forth in the old city. And this is before Pope Francis, who is easily the most ecumenical pope of all time. We're still in Benedict XVI at this point in time. Because remember, Francis became Pope February 13th of 2013.
And are we going to look into this specific appeal that was promoted by this man?
How exactly do you mean? Because I believe, if I'm understanding your question correctly, yes, but I just want to know how exactly you mean.
Well, because as I read the quote, it definitely gives us insight into what might be going on. But the Vatican's former archbishop, or actually it says archbishop, I don't know if that's different at all or not, but the Vatican's former archbishop in Jerusalem, Michael Sabah, so one person, he just promoted an appeal, which is pretty vague, to the European Union, okay, and United States to stop the Hebraization of Jerusalem. So this is so who filed the appeal and stuff like that? You know, like, what is this appeal? That would be pretty useful to know.
Yeah, so basically, and here, actually, I just pulled up an article here to read a little bit more about it from Independent Catholic News. I'll just read a little briefly. Patriarch appeals for help as more Christian land is confiscated. This is, of course, from a Catholic perspective. The website we're reading from right now is called Independent Catholic News. I just know that when I read this, right? Because you're going to hear some agenda.
We don't have to put it on screen, but I'll need the link to put
absolutely.
that in chat and to put it in the description later.
Absolutely. Let me send that here to you. Alrighty, so Patriarch Michael Sabah, former head of the Latin Church in Jerusalem, made a desperate appeal to the Christian world after Sunday Mass at Cremisian near Bethlehem yesterday. Sabah said, quote, "The message to the Christian world, the international community, and the Arab world is that the Holy Land is burning, dying, and being destroyed. And if you really care about justice and equality, you have the obligation to stop this war, killing, and destruction," end quote. Addressing participants who went on to take part in a protest march after the Mass, the Patriarch said, quote, "This is our land and will always remain ours. They claim, it's their land, but they use their soldiers, their tanks, their military occupation to force their will, and it is not their land. It is our land. And one day their forces will withdraw and the land will return back to its indigenous Palestinian owners," end quote. And so that is the actual text of his appeal that he sends out. He sends this out, like it says here, to the international community and Arab world. But to be more specific, he sends it out to the European Union, the United States, and I believe the Arab League, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not 100% sure who the Arab people he sent that out to was.
Okay, so am I following correctly that Michael Sabah officially sent out this appeal? So he didn't, I mean, because promoting it is like someone else did it, and then I'm saying, yeah, it's a good thing. So it sounds like he did more than promote it. They're like understating it here.
Yeah. And in fact, if we're really reading this, in its clear totality, what we find, at least in my perspective, is he is very clearly declaring. And this, by the way, I should point out, this is a reiteration of his appeal. But Michael Sabah is where this appeal comes from in the first place, right? And he is operating in official capacity for the Catholic Church as it pertains to the city of Jerusalem. As we've already seen here, he is the patriarch of the Latin Church in Jerusalem. Excuse me, I had to get some coffee there.
All right.
He also says the Cremisian Wall is an insult to peace. And that was back in, I believe, 2015. Real quick, I just want to point out, I don't want to obviously operate with the chat too much, not to get distracted, but Smokey Saint, I completely agree with you, man. Jill just set himself up for failure today. But at any rate, let's just get back into the topic here.
Oh yeah, and I agree too. So yeah, I mean, I got to say that, like, we have to say Ronnie's being shrewd here, right? Like, if we're to be honest, he's not the best debater, but he's very, very shrewd. That he's like, okay, someone will give me a debate that is like an auto win. That's a debate for someone like me. So I got to give Raging Ronnie credit for that. This is not something we normally do on the show. This is just, so consider it an inside joke of our community or something. But
yeah.
Okay, let's get back on topic.
For sure. So, 2 weeks ago, now, and remember, this is reading an article that was written 2011, right? 2 weeks ago, David Maria Jaeger, who was recently appointed by Pope Benedict XVI to the Vatican's highest court, talked in Washington, meaning Washington, D.C., about a current U.S. Supreme Court case over whether an American boy born in Jerusalem, should add Israel after the name of the historic city on his U.S. passport. Jaeger said that the question about Jerusalem is not whether it is the capital of Israel. It is a question of whether it is part of a national territory. Notice it did not say of Israel's national territory. It said of a national territory at all. Now, really quick, I want to pause here, and I'm going to send you this link as well, Brother Nicholas, because I do actually want the people to see this. Let me make sure I have the right one.
Okay, get the right one, and I'll put it on the screen.
Alrighty. Status of Jerusalem. So I had one that was from 2017, when the United Nations declared that Trump moving the embassy in 2017 was not legal. And they reiterated their support for a internationalization of it. But that internationalization itself was declared back in 1948, and I want to find that. Shoot, I should have had this up beforehand. I apologize, friends.
And I got to say, I'm inclined towards some deep conjecture on some of this. But I'm not going to be sharing it. I mean, I'm getting a bunch of information right now. The time for conjecture is after information, you know?
Yeah, and I certainly do, understand that the conjecture can kind of run wild when we talk about this kind of stuff because, there's so much information, and it's kind of scary information if we're being honest. You know what I mean? Like the fact that people can get away with doing things like this, like having these kinds of meetings. You're right. We have so many different prophetic ministries and apocalyptic ministries and revelations ministries and stuff like that. And yet none of them, almost at least, had any idea that this stuff was going on. You know what I mean? And it's worrisome that such a thing could actually occur, at least in my own opinion. But I digress. Where is... UN resolution from 1947. So I have a quote from it, but I don't have the document itself. But this is from the Wikipedia article. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution which, as part of its partition plan for Palestine, included the establishment of Jerusalem as a separate international entity under the auspices of the United Nations, a so-called corpus separatum. I do have a map of UN Jerusalem, though, so I can send that to you. But I'm wanting to find the document itself.
Well, we can come. I mean, you can find it, and we can come back to it tomorrow or something, like I did when I did the map to prove what I said about the location of the official seat of the Pope, which is on one of the 7 hills of Rome, not on Vatican Hill.
Right. And bare minimum, at least what I just sent you as far as the picture will at least give the audience a visual representation until we can actually come back tomorrow and find that. Because I don't want to derail this completely on just me trying to find something that really I should have already had. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, but the whole thing about jumping into it and getting it done is we can't wait until everything's perfectly prepared. So we just keep doing our best on the fly. You're good. And it's almost on screen now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's what it looks like. And there it is. Boom. That should be here.
All right.
And I can zoom in when I know where to zoom in.
Okay.
Oh, zoom in on... So this is all of... Is this a map of all of Israel?
So this is a map of these, kind of the center. You can see here you have Bethlehem at the bottom, so it's not strictly Jerusalem itself, but it's kind of like the center of Israel proper.
I was saying all of Israel, or is this just the district of Israel that Jerusalem is in or something?
Yeah, so what this is operating as, so it's like it's hard to kind of describe because it's not necessarily a district per se. Basically what this is a geographic area trying to show you a representation of the cities, but it's in about the center of Israel. It wouldn't include things like Galilee and stuff like that. But
then is Jerusalem this huge thing in the middle?
Yes.
Wow. And compared to these other cities that...
No, I know, right? Actually, you know what's interesting? You may not know this, but Bethlehem is actually tiny. And Bethlehem, as you can see, is like the biggest city here other than Jerusalem.
Whoa. And
but what you notice here...
The nation of Israel basically is the state of the city of Jerusalem basically is the nation of Israel. And so the idea that it could somehow not be the nation of Israel is just to say the nation of Israel doesn't exist. I mean, in my straightforward, modest, humble assessment, you know?
Yeah, amen. And if you look there, you see that checkered area, right? That is the old city. The old city is precisely what it sounds like. It is ancient Jerusalem. That is where that's where King David would have been ruling, and Solomon would have been ruling, and the temple would have been built, and Jesus would have been preaching, and so on and so forth, right?
Wow, it's huge.
It is. It is, especially for an old city, right? For an ancient city, it is ginormous.
Yeah, wow. I mean, with how much I know about it, like looking at this, giving me some kind of size reference, you know, it's like, it's really hitting me.
Now, the reason why it is specified in this map is because the area itself was supposed to be sort of, separated, right, as a holy site. Now, the whole area we're looking at, not just Jerusalem, but the entire district, all the way down here to Bethlehem, right? This entire district was supposed to be what they referred to as corpus separatum, right? Meaning not Palestinian, not Israeli, but belonging to some sort of an international community. They have since narrowed that down to this old city area. But notice that was only set up because of these old agreements in the first place, where they wanted to separate the old city from Jerusalem proper.
Wait, so it's one of those negotiation things where you try to take way too much so that when it gets whittled down, you're still getting what you were actually shooting for in the first place. Is that what we're looking at?
Exactly. 100%, right? The idea is we want to get the holy sites because that's the area that is supposed to be like Cardinal Jean had just said, right?
But the first request was so absurd. It doesn't make for any kind of negotiation to be whittled down from. This is crazy.
Oh no, it absolutely is crazy. I mean, if you actually look at a map and take into account how much this territory is actually taking, I mean, Israel would be literally unable to defend itself. Some of it at certain places would be less than 10 miles wide. Like this is an absolutely absurd partition. And I don't know if you've ever seen the map of the 1947 partition that the United Nations had planned, but it is the most bat-pucky thing you've ever seen in your life. There are literally instances where Israel is actually separated from other territories in Israel, because of how bad they separated these borders. It's the complete and total S show, if I may use, not necessarily the language itself, but you get what I'm saying.
Well, I prefer people don't, but okay.
Well,
I'm quite a square or overly pious, some might say. I try to be anyway.
Well, no, and I certainly understand that, and that's why I do try to keep it, somewhat censored here. But so to just kind of give you a idea of everything that we have here, right? So you see this partition of Israel. Here we go. 1947 United Nations Partition Plan for Palestine. There we go. Resolution 181. I actually have it up now.
Throw it in chat. I'll have it on screen and I'll be zooming on it and stuff in no time.
Absolutely. So here is the Wikipedia article, which will include links to the photos itself, as well as links to the actual document itself. It was the proposal by the United Nations which recommended a partition of mandatory Palestine. I'll probably stop reading, actually.
All right, so you said the link to Wikipedia. I was busy putting this on screen, and then somewhere here I'm going to find the link.
Yeah, so you see there the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181. It's on the Wikisource. This original text has text related to the article there.
I click on resolution.
Or scroll down a little bit.
So the entire article down here.
So it'll be in the text itself. Real quick though, can you scroll up? I do want to show people something while we're here.
I can zoom out.
That picture
would be more reasonable. What are we looking at?
Check out this picture. This is the original partition plan. That blue, that's Israel. Do you see that right there? It is literally almost separated in half. This was the original partition plan the United Nations had, and the blue areas are where the Jews would be allowed to live. Tell me that's not completely absurd.
Well, wait, not that they're not allowed to live in the international part, but the blue areas would be the only parts that they can own and nothing near the city of Jerusalem, which obviously is a Jewish city. Human history is so well testifying to that. I mean, as far as ancient heritage goes, I don't know. I do see how it's a difficult topic for people dealing with how territories change over time, and now they're trying to use the past as their claim. But we know as Christians that God is truth, and He said that the nation will be born again in a day, and they will say, "Who has ever heard of such a thing? A nation born in a single day?" And so we always stand with our Messiah. And we stand with the prophecies.
Amen. But, I just wanted to show people there because you see that white right there. Do you see the white in the picture? That's the picture we were seeing. It's kind of in the center of that orange. So that's the area that we were seeing, only condensed. So that would all be internationalized according to this plan. All of this orange would be Palestinian, and all of the blue would be Israeli.
And then the black dot is Jerusalem.
Yeah, and the black dot would be Jerusalem itself.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we see how it goes from being one super absurd bargaining chip that is basically saying, hey, we're talking to you as if you're a nation, but we're really, really, really insisting you're no nation at all whatsoever and that we own you. And then it goes down to a smaller bargaining chip, which is the same thing, except just focused in on only the most important part of the nation. And then, which this one was focused on the most important part of the nation anyway. And then now they're seeking to zoom in only on the city where the earthly holy sites of the God Jehovah, our God, where those sites are, and where unto ancient earthly heritage, the Jewish people have that heritage. So they're finally zooming in on just that black spot these days, though. They've whittled down that bargaining chip, and at some point they're going to say, well, this is what we're actually going for. We're not going to let you whittle us out of what we actually want.
Well, and as you'll see in some of our future, articles we'll show here, there's no need to. Unfortunately, and I hate to say it, but Israel is fully willing to capitulate to international communities as it pertains to the old city.
Wait, what would capitulate? That's like to give in?
Yeah. One of the things we'll discover over the course of this series that is somewhat heartbreaking for people is that Benjamin Netanyahu is no longer the strong leader he once was. And he truly was once a very strong, very noble leader. But sometime around 2015, 2016, that died. And I don't think we're getting it back.
Well, you don't think this is going to come to military conflict?
Well, I think that could kind of depend on how you mean. If you mean between the international community and Israel, no. I think they will be hand in hand with each other as far as this is concerned. Now, I could see some Islamic terrorism leading, coming out of this. But I personally believe that if and when, and I put that when there because I do believe this will be prophetic, or this is prophetic rather. But I do believe that once the Catholic Church gets a hold of the old city, you know how the Bible says he would deceive the very elect if it were possible. Well, I want you to imagine, hypothetically speaking, that the man who has claimed for the last 2,000 years, at least according to his own tradition, to be literally in place of God, actually managed to not only cause peace in an area where it had not existed for over 4,000 years, but managed to also establish himself as the firm custodian of the areas where Christ was crucified, the Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock sits, and managed to also bring peace between multiple different religions. You would have to be very biblically astute to not think of that man as a god, right? Because everything that he's done is miraculous at this point. Nobody could make peace between Muslims and Jews. Nobody could actually get the Palestinians and Israelis to agree with each other. Nobody could build a third temple while keeping the Dome of the Rock maintained. But now not only did somebody do it, but the person who did it claims to be a vicar of God, right? And I think when you put it in that perspective, it's going to be very difficult, I think, for a lot of people to remind themselves this man is a deceiver, because the things he's going to be doing are going to not only appear to be very good, but appear to be almost miraculous. Like, how did you accomplish this? You know what I mean?
Okay, is this in strict disagreement with a model that would expect the armies to surround the city as there's mention of armies surrounding the holy city in Revelation. So the holy city in Revelation would be a future city to come with Messiah, and not this one.
So it would not outright be denying that. The reason why is because I think that if we look at it, there's a couple different instances of events that take place, not necessarily explicitly related to this event, by which I mean like this event, when it takes place in time, will be sort of, in the same chronology of things, but not necessarily taking place at the same time that a military conflict would. I think a proper reading of Revelation, and this may be its own, rabbit hole itself, but I believe a proper reading of Revelation leads us to believe that the conflicts that we know of as the Armageddon conflict is actually after everything has happened with Jerusalem and everybody comes united and everything like that. So there would still be a military conflict in that sense, but it would be after the military. Now, there's also another fight, which is the fight of Gog and Magog, as prophesied by Ezekiel. And I think a proper understanding of that would lead us to probably believe that that is before, although many people have considered those to be prophecies of the self-same event. It seems to me like that describes some sort of a almost World War-like event that would probably end up coming before a partition of the old city. But I couldn't definitively say on that because I'm not sure. And people do make a good argument for Gog, Magog, and Armageddon actually being the self-same events. I mean, of course, Gog and Magog is explicitly referenced in Revelation, so it's not like, they're just pulling this out of their hat by any stretch.
Well, I mean, I'm just kind of doing a shot in the dark here because I'd have to look up what Gog and Magog are. But we do see two great global spiritual forces struggling to capture humanity. And that is like market-based capitalism and, where you dominate the market to rule everybody. Market-based fascism, and then you have the destruction of market unto socialism as another way to hold humanity captive. So I don't know if that might be the overall thing of Gog versus Magog, might be this really huge global struggle, on the things are happening on the deep state level. So maybe what Revelations is talking about is on the deep level.
Well, it's Revelation 20, which references Gog and Magog. It does need to be noted that it is actually Gog of Magog. Gog is a person, Magog is a nation.
So they're not two different sides conflicting against each other then.
Right.
Okay, well, everyone disregard that shot in the dark I just threw out there. You see, and that's the thing is like, a lot of this is exploring and asking questions and stuff, Since I've been qualified to study these things, I haven't really done a study yet. So this kind of is my study. So I'd say like I'm qualified to do my first study on this, but this sort of is my first study. So you guys are right there with me, seeing my sort of questions and stuff.
Well, and to a certain extent, we might want to kind of save some of this for a little later because Gog and Magog is a topic in and of itself. But just to be a little brief as to why I kind of think the way I do, if you look at Revelation 20, verse 7, it talks about Gog and Magog, and shall go to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle. But this is after, if you look at verses 7, 6, and so on, you'll notice this is actually after the 1,000-year reign, which I believe Antichrist would have appeared already by then, if we're having a proper understanding of. I don't quite understand the Messianic reign as much as I should. I will be perfectly honest about that, but it does seem clear to me that from a chronological standpoint, the time of wrath occurs, and then the Messianic reign of 1,000 years. And what exactly that means, I guess, is up for a little bit of dispute amongst brothers.
Okay. Yeah, because there's there's two drastically different possibilities there, and then there's the possibility of both. Whether there's a lot of conquering. Christ has been doing a lot of conquering for a long time, and he's still doing it. And I think sometimes, because of what the dragon has done, now that he's been cast down to earth, it's easy for us to forget that, like, he's been cast down to earth so that as Christ cast him out of heaven and conquered him and defeated him, now he's on earth so that his defeat is embodied on earth also. And exactly how that's going to happen, we'll see.
Amen. Well, and so to jump back to this article here, so you guys have now seen kind of the idea, right, of, for a long time there has existed, since 1947, there has existed this idea of Jerusalem not actually being a national territory.
Okay, so that's actually before they became a national territory, right?
Exactly. So since before we even had a modern state of Israel, the international community has been trying to get the city of Jerusalem as an international, or as it calls it, corpus separatum, right? Or separatum, sorry. I said separatum with an A.
So is that part of the whole way that Jerusalem or Israel was established in the modern era to begin with? Was like, we're going to let you do this, but you're going to be the means by which these other things happen too, and, like a deal behind the scenes?
That was the idea. Now, one of the common misconceptions about the founding of Israel that actually is very vital to our conversation, many people will often claim the United Nations created Israel, but that is actually not true. The United Nations attempted to create Israel with this Resolution 181 that we established, right? And the Israeli people agreed, actually. The Palestinian people did not. However, with that being said, the United States, the United Kingdom, and many of the powerful nations either voted against this mandate or completely abstained. And Israel, rather than waiting for this United Nations to drag its feet, just decided to declare its own independence openly at the leadership of David Ben-Gurion, thus starting the Israeli War for Independence. And then the reason at that point that Jerusalem was not actually under control of the Jewish people was really just military. The Jordanians finished the war still maintaining control of Jerusalem, and the Israelis didn't. It was unfortunately that simple. The war of 1967 that we commonly call the Six-Day War ended up ending that, as the Israelis took not only Jerusalem, but also Judea and Samaria, as well as Gaza and the Golan Heights. So, but to kind of, reiterate for, right, so when this guy, Father Yeager, as he calls himself, right, said that the question about Jerusalem is not whether it is the capital of Israel, but it is a question of whether it is a part of a national territory, right? We just got to know that even though he's a Catholic priest making these declarations, he is not alone or even unique, or not unique, sorry, or even the progenitor of this thought, right? This has been around for a long time in the international community.
Okay. Are we ready for me to find the article?
Well, so what I was scroll up real quick. So what I was pointing out there, what you see here, United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181 says Wikisource has original text related to this article. United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181.
Do I just click this little number 2, or do I click this Wikisource?
The link that you're on right now. Click on that, and that pulls up actually on Wikisource the resolution itself. So this is the actual document, Resolution 181 from 19.
Why does it say 2?
You talk about the 2 that's up there on the little. Oh, that 2 there. Is this not? It should be. the original. I wonder if potentially that might be a...
Let me see what. Maybe it's just a second draft that overdid the first draft. That's my best guess. And the first draft was no longer valid. So it's just a record.
Yeah, I guess to be honest with you, I never even kind of considered the two there. So I might, maybe that's a mishap on my part.
Well, I don't think it's exactly like that. I mean, if it's a mishap, it wasn't on your part. But I don't think it's a mishap. I just think we don't know what it means. It's as simple as that. So this is the document. Are we going over the document at all, or did you just want them to have full access to it like that?
I just wanted them to have full access to it and I wanted you to have access to it too, namely because that is something that in a future episode we'll have to get into when we start to focus on Israel itself and its foundation. Because that is, of course, something that is very important, not only to the prophetic aspect of it, but to the Vatican plan itself. But the reason that it's important for now is because it's not only do we want the people to go over it, and for you to have it yourself, but also we do want people to understand, right? This question that Father Yeager is bringing out, and the question that Cardinal Taron is speaking of, and things like that, right? This has been around for a long, long time. It's not a new conspiracy theory, that was formulated in some laboratory somewhere. It's actually a very, not only old, but in fact, you could say it's the old idea when it comes to partition of Israel, right? Because like you pointed out, I mean, the nation didn't even exist by the time this resolution did. And to kind of jump back to the Arup Shiva article, right? It points out after that, actually, here, let me wait a little bit because I think you still have that up, right?
Arup Shiva, the same article we were looking at before?
Yeah, the Vatican wants to lay its hands on
Okay, I'm going to use a
Jerusalem.
different tactic here. Share the application window that I keep browsing for different things. So here we are back to the article, and that must have been the last thing you read because it's still highlighted.
Yes, sir. And so when we go right under there, you see a few days earlier, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Father Twal, gave a speech to greet the bishops of Europe and North America during their annual pilgrimage in Israel, in which Twal denounced, quote, the Israeli right wing invading more and more of Jerusalem and trying to transform it into a only Hebrew Jewish city, excluding the other faiths, end quote. Notice his beef is with this Hebraization, right? He wants it to be a place for the other faiths as well, sort of a global hotspot, right?
Okay, and let's remind that the previous paragraph was, it is a question whether it is a part of a national territory. So whether it's at all a part of any national territory is a question. And those were the maps we just went over. And we came back in here.
Exactly.
And discussed how a few days earlier, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Father Twal, gave a speech to greet the bishops of Europe and North America during their annual pilgrimage in Israel, in which Twal denounced the Israeli right wing invading more and more of Jerusalem and trying to transform it into an only Hebrew Jewish city, excluding other faiths.
And by the way, just so you guys are aware, Twal is the successor of Sabah, right? So this is now the current Patriarch of Jerusalem, as well as his predecessor, who are in full agreement on this issue, which leads one to believe that perhaps that's because the Vatican is in full agreement on this issue, and that's why they keep appointing people in Jerusalem who are in full agreement with those issues, or with those points. Claudette Habesh, the Caritas General Secretary in Jerusalem, a Vatican NGO that works in social activities, just released an interview to Zenit News Agency in which he Christianized the Palestinian Intifada against what he called the checkpoint of humiliation, Let's say that one more time. He Christianized the Palestinian Intifada. That is a terrorist war, right? A war that was put forward by terrorist individuals, people who would hide behind women and children so that the Israelis would be forced either to not attack them or to kill women and children in order to get rid of the terrorists, right? People who would kidnap kids and then have those kids, in their armies at the age of 12 years old with fully working AK-47s shooting at Israelis, so on and so forth, right? This woman, tried to Christianize that event. And again, she is an official Vatican employee, Caritas General Secretary in Jerusalem.
I think this is a man because it says in which he Christianized. So it's probably just because he's European, maybe French even, or something. Claudette. I guess it's a man's name in this case.
Yeah, good catch there, actually.
Your general security in Jerusalem. Oh, so he's... Okay, so he's Israeli, I guess. A Vatican NGO. Oh, Caritas must be something Catholic. Okay. So Kadat Habesh, the Caritas General Secretary in Jerusalem, a Vatican NGO. What does NGO mean exactly? Non-governmental organization? Okay. That works in social activities. Just released an interview to Zenit News Agency in which he Christianized the Palestinian Intifada against what we call the checkpoint of humiliation. So it's these Palestinian terrorists calling it a checkpoint of humiliation. And
receiving full support.
I don't understand. I don't understand this word Christianized, and I don't understand what the checkpoint of humiliation is.
So by Christianized, what they mean is they are trying to basically put this intifada under the legitimate authority of Christianity. In other words, they are saying they are operating in a Christian manner and that as Christians, we should own this intifada, despite the fact that the intifada is explicitly Islamic terrorism. So
okay,
to give it...
So that's clear enough. It's just so vague, just this word Christianized in parentheses, I don't like getting information leaning on a vague word like that.
Well, vagaries are one of the easiest ways for people who have agendas to put their agendas in the forefront and therefore not have to hide it, but also at the same time be hiding it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could dig out the literal quote from him that this Christianized is summarizing, or is that going to be in here somewhere or anything?
Or maybe it probably isn't going to be in this article in particular, but I could certainly find it and we can bring it, tomorrow or sometime later on today. That won't be
tomorrow would be good, and this article should have it as a source, I would think.
Yeah, so once we get to the bottom, it should have links to its sources.
Yeah, and so well, we'll see when we get a chance to just maybe browse and check that link today, or else we can prepare to do it tomorrow. So, okay, yeah, because I don't want to just look at that vague word Christianized and lean on that. If that's going to have meaning to me, I have to take a look at that, at the quote of what's being characterized there. And then, do you know what the checkpoint of humiliation is, or is that going to be explained further and we just keep going?
So the checkpoint of humiliation is a commonly used propaganda point for Palestinian nationalists, basically saying that the idea that specifically Jerusalem is the recognized capital of Israel is utterly humiliating and a slap in the face to any idea of Palestinian sovereignty, because they also claim that to be their capital. Frankly,
if they're going to have peace in the city, then they can both do their capital functions in the same city. That would be a possibility. So, yeah, it doesn't have to be a checkpoint of humiliation. I mean, they can both make their declarations, and if they can live in peace and disagree, I mean, it's just not a big. I don't see that as a big deal.
Well, and the other thing I would point out too is, and I know, we live in the 21st century and it's hard for us to understand that this is a legitimate way to deal with things, but sometimes people need to just be allowed to fight it out. You know what I mean? Like, just have yourselves a little war. Somebody will win. They'll keep the city, and we'll move on with our lives. You know what I mean? It's harsh, of course. It's bloody. It sucks. It's terrible. We pray for Messiah to come so that these things don't have to happen again. But sometimes that is the only solution left, and it won't happen. I don't believe. But
if we get to that point, we do. But as far as them calling it a checkpoint of humiliation, I mean, like I said, as far as I can tell, the solution to that is just to let both. If we have both sovereignties right now, and we're saying we have both sovereignties, they can both conduct their business as sovereignties in the same city. Of course, we're saying, I guess, that we think the city of Jerusalem belongs to Israel, and it was taken, and they've had the opportunity to get it back. But of course, a lot of history has happened since then, so there has to be... it is important to let all this stuff hash out, and peacefully and in a cultural way, because the important thing is that culturally we move forward, and conquering a territory. I mean, I guess conquering a territory is a way of doing that, but
well, and we'll get more into it in future episodes, only because I have already sort of foreplanned that this would end up being an episode in and of itself, simply because there is a lot to go into on the founding of Israel and the partitions of Jerusalem.
Okay, so we'll save it for later, because I'm just thinking, like, yeah, this is such a well, I'm just thinking, where should I be on this, and why? I mean, it's not like the nation of Israel is following Messiah, and how did they get themselves in that position to have that city and stuff, And so it's definitely easy to see where people are coming from, where they think that, like, they basically just took that city now based on stuff that was going on thousands of years ago. But that's not how we operate. We don't, like, do things now based on claims based from thousands of years ago. That would be a disaster if people all over the world were doing that all the time. So I do got to say that I can we see where there's, like, logical ways to argue this, and I see where I can I definitely feel that I owe a full assessment to this before I'm hard pushing anything political,
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly understand that.
And then that's what we're doing. We're pushing forward for the next couple weeks, maybe, depending on how quickly we do this, if it's every day or not. But we're pushing forward to so hopefully I'll be able to make that assessment and meditate on it, and understand where it rests in my mind, whether that's a place of conclusion or a place of understanding without conclusion, whatever it is.
Well, and to sort of to kind of steer a little bit back to because I just noticed we're getting close to the minute 30 mark, or hour 30 mark rather. What we're seeing here in this article, right? What I was trying to point out to you guys is, remember these weird and peculiar phrases that people can build on from the fundamental agreement of 1993, right? And then we move forward. This is 2011, and
Wait, specifically, what are examples of the weird and peculiar phrases?
Yeah, like when they said they wanted to that they will discuss matters of unsettled property and economics, right? Or how they said that they will be discussing Vatican custodianship of holy sites, potentially. Or how they said they will be getting into these, recognizations of certain canon law and allowing them to exist in Israeli law.
Is this one of these also? There will not be peace if the question of the holy sites is not adequately resolved?
Well, this is not only, it is one of those we need to hold on to, but this is a fruition of that, right? In a sense, right? Because here we have from the fundamental agreement, right? These people saying, oh, we're going to discuss some of the holy sites potentially, maybe, right? Or not potentially, maybe, but like it could be like things like the Temple Mount potentially, maybe, right? And then we move forward here to 2011. This is 18 years later, right? And this precedent has now created a Vatican that completely and totally buys whole hog the original United Nations plan, right? Here you see what you have highlighted right now. The sacred and unique character of the area must be safeguarded, and it can only be done with a special internationally guaranteed statute. So notice this went from having control over certain holy sites to the Interreligious Dialogue Council for the Vatican declaring that the city needs to be internationalized and cannot belong to any one nation. That's a pretty large jump.
Yeah, and let's pay close attention to what's being said here as far as, because this is the whole point of a lot of yesterday and all of today, basically, is that there is a moving forward of the vague things we quoted yesterday and today from the article from the early 90s. And now we're at 2011, so that's about 20 years later. And it says the part of Jerusalem within the walls with the holy sites of the three religions is humanity's heritage. And remember, this is in context that there will not be peace unless these things are resolved. So, yeah, everything within the holy walls or within the walls of Jerusalem, everything within those walls, the holy sites of the three religions, is humanity's heritage. So that's singular for one, not plural. It's not our humanity's heritage. They said is humanity's heritage. So that already includes the Temple Mount.
Exactly.
The sacred and unique character of the area must be safeguarded. This is the key part, and it can only be done with a special, internationally guaranteed, that means military enforcement. It can only be done, it must be done, and only can be done, so it will be done with internationally, militarily enforced statute.
And let's be, and I thank you very much, Brother Nicholas, because those things absolutely need to be specified. But let's specify two other things real quick here, too. Notice with the holy sites of the three religions, you've now explicitly said the Temple Mount, because Judaism and Islam, as well as Christianity, but Judaism because it's the Temple Mount and Islam because of the Dome of the Rock, claim.
And because it's singular, they've explicitly included the Temple Mount.
Exactly. So now
the three religions with the holy sites, plural, of the three religions is, okay, so the part of Jerusalem within the walls is humanity's heritage. So that's where they're making it singular. Now, is the Temple Mount within the walls? Yes.
Exactly. And so when you can combine those things, right, it's like now it's no longer vague. It is clear we're discussing the Temple Mount. But also, here's the other thing we need to remember, okay? Who is saying this? It's not just that this person is an official Vatican employee, right, or an official Vatican ambassador, I should say. But let's scroll up a little bit really quick. It's Cardinal Jean-Louis Taran, head of what? The Vatican's Council for Interreligious Dialogue? That's interesting. Interreligious dialogue. What is the guy?
Where am I finding this?
Very first paragraph.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Cardinal Jean-Louis Taran, head of the Vatican's Council for Interreligious Dialogue. The guy who is the number one ambassador for the Catholic Church on interreligious dialogue is the self-same guy who is saying we need a internationally guaranteed statute safeguarding the old city.
Everything within the walls. Everything within the walls, singular.
Exactly.
Okay, so then the question is whether or not that's just a good thing to do with safeguarding, or whether it's something else kind of a thing, which we've been addressing. So should we get back out of this article because people have access to this? And I'll be putting it in the description. So if you see this video too soon for links to be in the description, just know, like, I'm new to this, and it's going to be a chore to get the links in there. And I'll try to get a good groove going so that I get them in there right away in the future. But they will be there eventually. So if you want the links and you don't see them, just come back in a few days or something. Probably as soon as we go a day without doing an episode, that I'll compile the links, whichever ones I missed.
Well, so and this would be probably a good place to jump off, and then what we can do is go into that other article that I had actually sent you, which should be exclusive, a seat for the Pope at King David's tomb. And if this sounds like something that comes from
for the Pope at King David's tomb,
yeah. And if this sounds like something that comes from, Red Moon Rising or something like that, once again, this is Erut Shiva, one of the largest, at the time, the largest news organization in the entire state of Israel. Let's read here. An historic agreement has been drafted between Israel and the Vatican. The Israeli authorities have...
Shall we begin with their subheadline? Israel seems to have sold Jerusalem to the Vatican.
Yes, thank you for adding that there. So, and with that, you're right. And I mean, notice, right? This is people from Israel. This isn't Christians. This is Jewish people from this nation of Israel who are, from a nationalistic standpoint, making the claim that Jerusalem is being sold. And that's important because it's not people who come with the same presuppositions that me and Nicholas do, right? An historic agreement has been drafted between Israel and the Vatican. The Israeli authorities have granted the Pope an official seat in the room where the Last Supper is believed to have taken place on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, and where David and Solomon, Jewish kings of Judea, are considered by some researchers to also be buried. It is the culmination of a long campaign by the Catholic Church to regain religious stewardship over the place where Jesus is supposed to have broken bread and drunk wine with his disciples on the eve of his crucifixion. This is an enormous issue pushed through without any public debate. According to our sources, the agreement, which is expected to be ratified next June, by the way, this is in 2006, I believe, is when this article was written. According to our sources, this agreement, which is expected to be ratified next June, gives the Pope a special authority over the second floor of the building so that Christian pilgrims, will be able to celebrate religious functions like Pope John Paul did in 2000. The agreement constitutes Israel's capitulation to the Vatican efforts to Christianize the holy sites, like when a Catholic covenant was built in Auschwitz. I'm not joking. This article is not joking either. The Catholic Church has long wanted control over that part of the area on Mount Zion, so as to turn it into an international religious center for Catholics. The blueprint of the agreement reads as follows, quote, the Vatican hands over this use of the cenacle to the custody of the Holy Land, which will keep the cenacle open from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. for the celebration of Holy Mass, end quote. And you get the idea. You guys can read the rest of it for yourself, except for one particular portion. We're going to scroll down a little bit. Brother Nicholas, do you see the portion that says the custody of the Holy Land, the Franciscan Order, and so on?
Yeah, we all see it.
All right. So the custody of the Holy Land, the Franciscan Order, who, with Vatican approval, is in charge of the holy sites, campaigns with the Arabs against Israel. One more time. The custodian of the Holy Land, the Franciscan Order, who, with Vatican approval, is in charge of the holy sites, campaigns with the Arabs against Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who are spiritually inclined, what you need to understand here is there is something out there that is not a coincidence, and that is that the one and only pontiff to ever carry the name Francis, named specifically after Francis of Assisi, the founder of the Franciscan Order, is the current pope, who happens to be the most ecumenical of all popes ever, like in their entire history. There is a reason for that, right? And as far as, and it's not coincidental that he didn't just call himself Francis because he liked the name, but it was specifically after Francis of Assisi, who is the founder of the Franciscan Order, who is in charge of the holy sites in Jerusalem. As far back as May 2000, you see Yasser Arafat met with Islamic and Christian clergymen as well. So there's just that to note. But I think that actually is kind of a solid place for us to stop with the articles and perhaps maybe the episode itself, because I don't want to get into another article that could potentially take us over the 2 hour. In fact, it absolutely would take us over the 2 hour mark.
Well, we did pretty good last time, stopping in the middle of an article and sort of emphasizing point. But if the article is not really as much a point of emphasis, then it's not a good place to stop. Yeah. So so I kind of want to lay out a couple things here as far as what it is that we've seen here, right? And we're going to keep doing this where we go back to older articles and then extrapolate them with newer articles, right? But what we saw with that fundamental agreement, which we'll be referencing time and time again, because it is not only a foundation for all the things that happened between the Vatican and Israel, but it's actually a foundation for the way that the Vatican deals with governments, period. When we get to the Sino-Vatican agreement, for example, right, we're going to see some, which is the agreement that Pope Francis signed with China in 2018. We're going to see that this level of political reasoning and ambassadorship has actually taken a whole new perspective, or a whole new what would the phrase be there? Meaning, I guess, under the Francis papacy. Well, let me ask you something then. Is an article on China the next place we're going?
No. So what I want to establish next is, you know what? An article on China could be the next place we're going, actually.
Yeah, bouncing back and forth might be good. Like, if we stay on the same topic for way too long, that gets hard to pay attention to, even if it's, another day. So if we go to China and then connect it back, I bet that's a good way to go about it. So can we give them a sneak peek of this article in China and introduce what the next episode will be, and then close?
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and pull up the articles here. So what I'll pull up right now is an article about the document, and we'll have the document actually formed tomorrow, as well as the article itself.
Okay, yeah. So we're not going to worry about any proof for the sneak peek for tomorrow. Proof will come tomorrow. So yeah, that's that. Now, do you already have the link? No,
yes,
it's not
sir,
in the private chat yet. Oh, you do have it. Okay.
All right, and so I'm gonna send this.
Just the briefest summary. We started out mostly in Revelation, and also Daniel, establishing that Rome and the papacy are the woman that sit upon the beast, the whore, who is the mother of harlots, which is other churches that are adulterating against God. And then the beast coming out of the sea has a lot to do with government power and those sorts of things. The sea is peoples and nations and tongues, and we traced it through time some to this point, looking at what's going on in Israel now, focusing in on understanding how the papacy is working, or getting some insight into it, so that we have to keep building up our ability to assess these things. So there's a lot of pieces that have to be built on each other. So we're learning a lot about the Vatican, dealing with politics, dealing with these holy sites, and they have made very real steps towards global military enforcement of an international ownership of the city of Jerusalem in Israel. And then the apparently the body who would make decisions for that and all that apparently is going to end up being the Vatican, but they're going to be claiming that, they're getting the whole world to agree to it, kind of a thing. So is that pretty much a decent summary of today?
Yeah, I'd say that's perfect. We're seeing now, and it's definitive, right? We've been showing here that the Catholic Church is absolutely trying to gain ownership of the old city, and they're saying it blatantly, right? And I just want people to know that, because, and I want to keep stressing that, and I will keep stressing that over the course of these conversations. And by the way, notice it says a faithfully Catholic perspective. That's another thing I want to point out too. So many of these sources that we're giving to you guys, they're not the sources that should be agreeing with us, right? Urut Shiva and Vatican News and the World Catholic Report, right? I'm quoting hostile sources, and yet they still come to the same conclusion that I am. Why do you think that is? Perhaps it's because this is the case. Perhaps it's because the Catholic Church does actually want to have some sort of a internationalization headed by them in the old city. And perhaps it is because they really want canon law in Israeli law, and perhaps so on and so forth, right? Understanding the 2018 China-Vatican agreement a year later, the present man, I cannot say this word.
Synicization. It has to do with your own name, bro. You should be able to say it.
You would think, right? You would think. Campaign has grown more determined since the good old Winnie Jinping, Winnie the Flu up there. I'm sorry if I'm insulting with that man, but I despise that man. He's a dog like any dog in this world. Anyways, sorry, getting a little angry there. I'm very displeased with Xi Jinping, because he does very evil things to his people, including but not limited to our brothers in Christ. But nonetheless, we'll get to that. And the government control of Catholicism has reached its highest level since the death of Mao in 1976. Let me say it again. The present Sinicization campaign has grown more determined since Xi Jinping's rise to power in 2012, and the government control of Catholicism has reached its highest level since the death of Mao in 1976. Once again,
what is a Sinicization campaign with a capital S?
So, have you by chance ever heard of the phrase Sino?
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
So, it comes from, I believe, Siam, if I'm not mistaken. But nonetheless, regardless of where it specifically comes from, basically what it refers to is China itself. And so Sinicization, or Sinification would be another way to put it, would refer to making something more Chinese or influenced by Chinese culture.
Okay, so the present Sinicization campaign has grown more determined since Xi Jinping's rise to power in 2012. And this is quoting from 2018. And the government control of Catholicism has reached its highest level since the death of Mao in 1976. So government of China controlling Catholicism in order to make it more Chinese and less Catholic and less Christian, for that matter.
Well, and here's one thing I want people to kind of note on this. A little bit of a teaser for our next episode, right? This article, and I agree with this article in very, very many instances, but this article is in the end written by traditionalist Catholics, and they are seeing it through their traditionalist Catholic lens. Pope Francis did not sign the Sino-Vatican agreement so that China could grow great and powerful. Pope Francis has a plan here. There is an agenda at play, right? And whilst the Sino-Vatican agreement provides the Chinese government with insane power over the Catholic Church in China, the benefit that the Catholic Church gets from China, when people actually start to realize it, is quite truly apocalyptic in nature. It is immense. To give you just a little teaser, it is essentially complete and total religious dominance over any faith in China.
Okay, so they're giving Catholicism dominance over any faith in China, and the government control of Catholicism. They are, let me see, the present Sinicization, so that's in 2018. So that's essentially today. The present Chinification campaign has grown more determined since Xi Jinping's rise to power in 2012. And the government control of Catholicism, which is the government control of all the religions, because Catholicism is being given control over all the religions, has reached its highest level since the death of Mao in 1976. So we'll see how the Vatican is connected to this, maybe some of what they say about it, because we're about to read all that. So that's the teaser, right?
Exactly. And one of the things we'll see in this too, this will be one of those instances where we can highlight that we must separate Catholics from Catholicism and the Catholic Church, because it was actually the Archbishop of Hong Kong, Joseph Zen, who went against both his government and his church in declaring the Sino-Vatican Agreement, selling out Christians to the Chinese government. And you know, that man was a cardinal and the Archbishop of Hong Kong. So, you know,
and this is why I describe Rome as an infiltration into the Catholic Church. I don't know how correct I am in describing it as an infiltration. It's kind of hard to assess what the best word choice is, but that's how I put it, so that we can think of these different factors honestly, you know?
Well, and exactly, because one of the things that I think becomes difficult for many to realize with this is there is many who are genuinely deceived by the Catholic Church. And the thing about genuine deception is it's not actually your fault, right? You may say you're uninformed or something like that potentially, but if you've been genuinely deceived, then it is not because of any sort of a lack of intellect on your part or lack of integrity on your part or anything like that. You're just simply misled, right? And unfortunately, if you are misled to a point, then you start to become part of the problem to a very real extent. But when we understand that these people are deceived and not deceivers, I mean that is a huge, I think, revelation to witnessing to Catholics, right?
Yeah,
because they're not deceivers.
And that gets confusing all the time when we're trying to assess propagandists, who's deceiving us, because first people deceive other people, and then the deceived person in their heart is being innocent enough, but they're helping to spread the deception. And then we're trying to think like, well, we're trying, sometimes we want to know who in their heart is being like evil and who is innocently doing the whim of evil. And that's why it all comes down to Christ. He made God obvious on the cross, and all who are of the truth hear his voice. And so ultimately it still comes down to Romans 1, that God is obvious in the creation, and from there God's character is obvious by Christ on the cross. We preach Christ crucified. And then to suppress that obvious truth is still without excuse. But as we understand these things, we want to understand that they're complex and nuanced, and we want to be fair every which way. So I'm not going against anything CJay said, but just providing more completeness to the exact truth of what we're talking about. And then CJay, if you disagree with that, then I'd like you to set some records straight for yourself. But I also have the question, the Vatican, are we going to go into seeing how they're somehow trying to take control of the whole spiritual aspect of the entire population of China? Is that what we're about to see? That spiritually they want to be the ones in their heads and in their hearts of all the Chinese population?
Yes, and this is, and what we'll be doing is we'll be extrapolating those portions where it said that in the fundamental agreement where it was talking about canon law being recognized by Israeli law. What the Chinese Vatican agreement did is it allowed, for the first time ever, a operation of two separate autocratic powers to work in unison with each other for each of their goals to be met. And that allowed, because basically what ended up happening is, certain religions are illegal in China, right? In fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe almost all religions are illegal in China. But certainly Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Falun Gong, those are illegal in China. And the government of China, when it signed the Sino-Vatican agreement, what it was essentially doing is it was allowing the Catholic Church to, have legal worship in the nation of China, so long as it was official Catholic worship, right? It was like endorsed by the Vatican. What the Chinese government got out of this is the Vatican must allow all bishops and cardinals to be appointed by, or at least approved by, the Chinese Communist Party. And the Chinese Communist Party also gets to edit the Bible as they see fit. I did not make that up. That is an actual part of this agreement. Also, the Roman Catholic Church does have to sign with the Religious Bureau, which does actually have its own name, but for pithiness sake, we're going to call it the Religious Bureau for now. And so those things give China what China wants, which is making sure that it replaces the omnipotent God of the Bible with state power. But what it gives the Catholic Church is not only the legal ability to, have these official churches operating in an official capacity and worshiping, but now nobody else does as well, right? The Muslims, who are currently being put in concentration camps, and the Christians, who are currently put in concentration camps, and the Falun Gong, who are currently being put in concentration camps, and so on and so forth, right? They don't actually have the official stamp of approval to worship, but the Catholic Church does. So the Catholic Church gets to not be punished by these different groups, right? Then you couple that with the fact that Pope Francis has also said we will take evangelization over doctrine, and has made very clear with his, which we'll see in future episodes, right, with his ecumenization with the World Council of Churches and with the Mormons and with the Lutherans and so on and so forth, right? Basically, what he's going to end up doing, what he is allowing for to occur, is you can be a Catholic and not actually be a Christian. In other words, you can go and be under the official auspices of the Catholic Church, worshiping your own faith, but technically under the authority of Pope Francis. Now China is satisfied, Francis is satisfied, and none of this actually had its precedent in anything that had to do with China, but had to do with Israel back in 1993, when they said we'll have canon law actually recognized by the government, and we'll have these church officials being, in a sense, government representatives, right?
Okay. So I think that's a very good summary right there before details distract from the focus, since we're going into the details tomorrow. And I want to bring this back together spiritually with other things, because we see in this section, and whereas you saw the feet and toes part of potter's clay, well, that's a reference to Christianity, right? We are the potter's clay vessels, and part of iron, some vessels of wrath, some vessels of honor, and part of iron, and the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as you saw the iron mixed with miry clay, and the toes of the feet, part of iron and part of clay. The kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas you saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. And I think we see this. I think maybe the statue of gold Babylon, silver Medo-Persia, bronze Alexander, Greece, and then iron and clay, iron Rome, and then iron and clay, Rome and the church. I think the statue represents humanity in some sense. And we see they mingled themselves with the seeds of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. So Christ's kingdom will break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. And Christ makes communion with humanity to save us. So we know that eating flesh or drinking blood represents communion. And so I think there's a spiritual depth of that here, where he condescends himself to humanity and makes he who knew no sin became sin so that we may become the righteousness of God in him. And then I'd like to bring that to Revelation 17, which brings this just about full circle. Because what we're saying about China is that the papacy, that is the Vicar Christos, the in place of Christ, the Antichrist by official title, wants to have communion with as many as she can, drunk off the blood of the righteous saints of God. And so that's where we're going to look at the communion again real quick here. And we discussed this stuff a lot in the first episode. Just trying to find where we see the woman drunk. Is that chapter 17?
Yes, sir.
Book of Lamb. Is it this final paragraph? I'm just not finding the part where she's drunk off the blood of the saints. It's not the final paragraph at all, is it?
No, it's actually in the beginning.
Okay, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Yeshua. Jehovah is salvation. And when I saw her, I wondered in great admiration, and the angel rebuked me. So, yeah, the Catholic Church is wanting Antichrist communion. So I guess so far that has become the focus of this series, is discerning the Antichrist as the Roman papacy.
Say that one more time, brother.
So far, the focus of this series has been discerning the Antichrist as the Roman papacy.
Amen. So two things in particular: the Antichrist, capital A, as the Roman papacy, as well as the whore being the Roman papacy, and then also the association with the beast, which the whore rides, with this international government structure, which is not quite set up yet, but which is being set up by virtue of these agreements with China and Israel, these setting up of holy sites, and of course, we'll get into further things like the United Nations of Religions and the United Nations itself. But, we have so much to talk about that those might be in some other episodes. We'll see, right?
Yes, perfect. So just beware, brethren, and let us pray this out. Let me see. Stop screen share. I can't remove us because then they won't hear us. So I just need to put an overlay that makes the screen black when I want to do like blackness. So okay. So Heavenly Father, our God, Jehovah, Yeshua, Jehovah is salvation. We thank you for our community here and for communion with you and for your shepherding, that you keep us safe and that you have made us to hear your voice. And we thank you for everything else also. Those are the focuses of this moment. All praise to you, beyond any praise we could ever speak. Amen.
Amen. And yeah, this has been solid conversations. I'm liking them. We're obviously going to be having a lot more solid ones. I hope you guys in the audience are finding this to be useful. Whoever the gentleman earlier was who said that there was the conjecture and such, I hope that he's starting to kind of see a little bit of.
It's this guy. We'll say the show's over, but we'll talk to this guy real quick before I click end broadcast. He says to me, haven't seen much of your stuff, but as usual, you are an excellent host. Let me know about our engagement. I look forward to it. When is your next debate? I don't have a debate scheduled. I'm first and foremost a servant of Christ, and debating comes with that. And official debating is new to me. So I'm sort of making my way in there. So you hear a lot of me arguing with people and stuff all over the place. Can be said to be prepped for that. And I know CJay is already sort of into debating and stuff. And, Schmatz, yeah, like I said, we don't want to distract from what we're doing here. But I presume CJay is down to debate specific points with you and stuff because CJay would like to show how strong his case is, So he would love that. And he's well, go ahead and speak on that, CJay.
Well, excuse me. I would just say that, I am absolutely willing to have discussions and or debates, depending on how formal anyone wants to be on these issues. I think that the evidence is very clear. Now, if we did want to have a discussion, the only thing I would ask is that, excuse me, it be separated into a subcategory because the category itself is so huge. So, for example, is the Pope the whore of Babylon? That's a subcategory / Antichrist, right? You could kind of, I think the two are one and the same.
And I was thinking even more specific since we're talking so specifically, and he was speaking against that, like since we're digging in so deep to things. So yeah, exactly. So we'll see what happens in the future, but I appreciate you not spamming our session with your opinion and stuff. And yeah, we would like to engage with your opinion elsewhere. And so yeah, we may hear from you later, and we'll just see how that goes. So oh yeah, I have my usual outro. If you want to say goodbye real quick, because I think we've been dawdling on for like 10 minutes, and then I'll give my quick outro, and we'll just click end broadcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say to everyone, I just hope that we're kind of seeing more and more building blocks come into play as each episode comes in, and I hope to put more blocks on there again. So shalom all.
And I say I wish shalom to all of you, but it's the one true peace that only Messiah can give. And so therefore I give all of you the same advice, whether you're already doing it or not. And that advice is just trust Messiah.